Good evening. My name is Gregory Hodge, and this evening we'll be discussing white privilege in America. For the purposes of this conversation, we will use the definition given by Professor Kendall Clark at the University of Dayton in Ohio. White privilege: a right, advantage, or immunity granted to and enjoyed by white persons beyond the common advantage of all others. An exemption in many particular cases from certain burdens or liabilities. I believe an important quote for the purposes of this conversation comes from Mrs. Peggy McIntosh, who is an associate director at the Wellesley College, specifically in the Center for the Research of Women. She states, "As a white person, I've been taught racism is something that puts others at disadvantage, but had been taught not to see one of its corollary aspects, white privilege, would put me at advantage." She continues, "The advantage exists unconsciously and is often invisible to the very white people who enjoy it." I believe that part is very important because it releases the thought that there's a blame for white privilege in the modern white person who's listening to this conversation. And then it brings the question, how did the white race become at advantage rather than any other race who inhabits America? From my research, I think that the answer lies in the fact that every race in America has had a major oppressive event at the hands of the white race. For example, for African Americans, we have slavery, which started in 1789. Oppression continued until the Civil Rights Act was passed in 1965. Oppression still continues today, just in a less obvious way. For the Chinese and Asian Americans, the Chinese Exclusion Act of 1882 excluded Chinese Americans from immigrating to the United States at a time when the Transcontinental Railroad was finished, due largely to labor at Chinese hands. For Latino Americans, they face immigration litigation against them and have for a long time, from Arizona's Papers, Please law to California's famously failed Prop 187. For Native Americans, the original owners of this country, we took the land, first off. Also, we marched these people more west as our country developed and put them in reservations. Historically, these marches were very brutal, known as the Trail of Tears is one of the more historic ones. And for Middle Eastern Americans, life after 9/11 has become very profiling. Profiling is the main word that comes to my mind when I think of life after 9/11 for Arab American. Another word that dances in my mind is Islamophobia, because it is the one time where we profile based on a religious movement rather than how someone physically looks. So with those past markers of how white privilege has happened in Americans' history, how can we say that it continues? Because saying that white people had privilege is not saying that they have it at this moment. So I took a couple parts that I know personally but stick out in society. The police. The way the police protect black and brown neighborhoods in comparison to the way that they protect white neighborhoods are very different. In black and brown neighborhoods, police use military tactics and precision, which is not needed for civilians, but is used nonetheless. In the education system, segregation was never quite equal, and the proliferation of the private school industry after we brought all the schools together further brought the gap between where races get their education. The private school movement also made education less about race and more about the means that your family could provide, which in the long scheme of things brings it back to race, because there's a large divide in wealth between each racial section. The next a glaring example for me would be in the political arena. In America, all power is wielded in our governmental system. In the 113th Congress, which was elected in November of 2012, and that includes the House of Representatives and the Senate, there are 2 Indian, 11 Asian, 42 African American, and 35 Latino members. In the 111th Congress, there are 539 members. That disparity shows that there is an obvious slant in the way that we say things are equal in the way that they truly are. If these are just a few ways, and we haven't delved into money, wealth, median income, then I would like to think that there is a reason when you control media, when you control government, when you control history and how it's told. These are the reasons that I believe, and my research has shown, that white privilege exists in America. Thank you for your time.